Hi, I'm Patrick Rea, and I am a passenger on this episode of the Terror Express.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Terror Express. I'm Jason Bradford, and today we have with us an award-winning independent filmmaker named Patrick Rea. He has won 2 Heartland Emmy Awards. And Patrick, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you here today. How are you?
Glad to be here.
It's great seeing you. I've been an admirer of your work for quite some time now, so it's really exciting to be able to chat with you here. And I noticed that a lot of your work, you like to incorporate a lot of mythological and supernatural creatures and characters into your films. What is it about that subgenre that appeals to you, and when did you first decide to make that kind of film?
You know, I've just always been attracted to those kind of stories, and I've tried to create some creature feature movies where the monsters are sort of original. Like, I mean, with Nailbiter, we tried to do something where we're like, okay, well, what spurs the people to transform into these monsters? And we're like, well, how about storms? We live in Kansas, and that seemed like an appropriate thing. And then with Arbor Demon, which was titled Enclosure when we actually shot the movie, we had this interesting backstory to these creatures that are living in the woods. And when I originally wrote the script with my co-writer Michelle Davidson, we had actually set that story in the Ozarks because we both live in Missouri now, and I was like, well, if we're going to shoot this on a limited budget, let's set it in the Ozarks. That's only a couple hours away. But as fate had it, we ended up filming the movie in South Carolina. So she and I had to kind of delve back in and change the backstory on these creatures. So for me, it's always trying to come up with some type of original vantage point on, a monster movie, and take it in try to take it in a different direction. Yeah. And with I Am Lisa, obviously, we did the werewolf genre, which was, fun because obviously werewolf movies are some of my favorites, and I really want to do a vampire film at some point because Fright Night's one of my favorites,
Great film.
I've done a vampire short film years and years ago that played at festivals and stuff, but at some point I want to make a feature with vampires.
I'm going to admit to you now, I have seen Nailbiter more than once. It's a great film. I loved the originality of it.
Cool.
The storyline, the pacing, the characters. It was so original. I remember when it was over, I looked at my friend that I watched it with, and I said, "Wow, I've never seen that storyline before. That was completely fresh, and I really, really enjoyed Nailbiter."
And funny story on that, we desperately want to make a sequel to that movie, and we've been trying for years, but it's one of those things with distribution and the ins and outs of how that all worked out with the movie. It's been difficult to secure financing for a second movie. So, and I've been also changing my approach to a sequel to that movie, and I've also been working on other things. It's just been hard to. And at some point, it would be great if at some point I could just self-finance a sequel for it. But we'll see what happens in the future.
It's hard to find a fresh storyline in a creature feature, which happens to be my favorite subgenre too. So it's. Yeah, and Arbor Demon was another one. The build and the suspense of that one was really great. And I didn't realize at the time that I was watching it that I was watching Fiona Dourif.
Right.
Now looking back, I'm thinking, wow, she's amazing in everything she does. And yeah. I don't know if you watched the Chucky series that's out now, but she played like her father in one episode, and she's just so amazing. And to see her now and even then on Arbor Demon was a real treat when you go back and rewatch it now.
Yeah, and I feel like that movie's gotten a little bit more appreciation over the last couple of years because full disclosure, I did not like the new title. So I was like, I shot the movie, the script was called Enclosure, and that was for me, like, since they're trapped inside of a tent for the majority of the movie and they've got these creatures circling the tent, I felt like Enclosure was a perfect title. And it had its premiere at Fright Fest in London. And by the time we got distribution for the film, this was around 2017. So there was a thing called alpha stacking where a movie with an A title would just come up first on like your VOD or DirecTV or something like that. So they decided to make that the new title. And I was not crazy about it because I came from Nebraska, which is home of Arbor Day. So I was kind of like, that's all I could think about when I saw the title. I was like, Arbor Day. Why would they? But in retrospect, I mean, the movie's done, like, it's on Paramount Plus right now. It's on Epix. It's on a lot of different streaming services. And so I think it's kind of gotten a little bit more of a following, because I think people watch it expecting it to be a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean,
I thought it was
schlocky,
more, it had a
schlocky.
lot of suspense and kind
Yeah.
of psychological,
Yeah. And
claustrophobic even.
so I think the movie, has benefited from that, and
Mhm.
people catching it on these streaming services now. And the crazy thing was that the principal photography for that movie was 12 days,
Wow.
in South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and so it was a mad dash. The whole shoot was really, really fast. And the crazy thing is, we shot that in December. It was just 2015, I think, and we shot it in December, and which is crazy because in Charleston, South Carolina, December is like 70 degrees. You forget that it's Christmas is even coming until you go to a store later and you're like, oh, there's Christmas stuff everywhere. But what was challenging was that we had to shoot as much daytime exterior stuff as possible, but the days are shorter in December. So
Mm.
there were days where we had to light the forest to make it look like daytime. So we had these
Wow.
big condor lights to make it look like it was a daytime forest scene. And there was just a lot of makeup involved too with the creatures. So that was a very challenging movie to make. So it's rewarding to hear that people still enjoy it. I get messages about it from time to time, and so that makes me happy.
I think that's going to be one of those timeless films that you watch 20 years from now and it's still going to look and feel new
Right,
and relevant with what scares people.
right.
Um, let's talk a little bit about your upcoming projects. Do you have anything planned? Anything you would like to promote, or any new projects coming along?
I mean, other than the feature that we've got a feature that we just finished post production on. We shot it last year, called "They Wait in the Dark," and we could talk about that as well. But it's moving towards distribution, so nothing official yet. But it's got its worldwide festival premiere at Popcorn Frights, and then it's going to have its international premiere at Fright Fest, and then we have a couple other festivals lined up after that. So it's exciting and it's fun to get it out there. And again, it was one of those movies where we shot it at the time the pandemic was kind of like, and people were getting vaccinated, and so it was this moment. It was between Omicron or Delta maybe, and there was like a lull there, and we're like, all right, we can film this movie. And we were lucky because right around that, after we wrapped, or like a couple weeks later, there was the I think Delta after that. And so we were fortunate to get the movie shot during the pandemic, but it was a movie that had relatively few locations and a small cast, so that allowed us to really keep the crew small. And just because the movie's a little bit more, it's a more intimate movie than I think some of my other films.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that movie
I
is
love-
I'm getting that movie out there right now, and then I've got a couple short films I'm still circulating. And then I'm starting to try to figure out what I'm going to do next. We have a potential I Am Lisa sequel that is kind of in the works. Some money has been raised for it, and then I have a vampire movie that I really want to make at some point.
Can you tell us a little bit about the vampire movie?
Well, I've got this vampire movie that basically it's just a nugget of an idea right now, but it basically involves vampires trying to hijack a truck that's come from a blood drive. So it's kind of got like a heist element to it. I haven't seen a vampire movie like that where they're trying to steal like a giant truck of donated blood.
Yeah.
So that's one idea I've got going around, and then I've got several other projects right now that I'm just trying to get off the ground. Raising funds for movies right now is very difficult. Always difficult. Actually, It's never been easy. And no matter how many features you've made, it always feels like you're kind of starting over with that process.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people have asked me, okay, how do you raise financing? How do you find financing? And I'm like, there's no special button for it. It's kind of different every single time. It's like, it depends on the circumstances. And a lot of the times I just tell people, you've got to create relationships and maintain those relationships.
Yeah.
And those, eventually that might lead to another film being made. So I always my biggest piece of advice to people is don't be a jerk. So it's
Right.
like be
Right.
nice to people, treat people with respect, and
Right.
you know, that'll lead to the next projects. Otherwise, if you're a jerk, then
Yeah, toxicity isn't going to get you anywhere. It's just
exactly,
it's just a
So
dead end in all directions.
exactly.
Speaking of toxicity, a lot of people think that horror films is kind of like that really heavy rock music gets a bad rap in horror films.
Of
A
course.
lot of people think that the horror films is a negative psychological impact on passionate minds,
Sure.
like parents not wanting their kids to watch it, and so on.
Right.
How would you defend the horror genre against that type of crowd?
I mean, for me, like again, like I don't believe that horror has a negative effect on people. I think it's cathartic more than
Mm-hmm.
anything.
Yeah.
I feel like there are people out there that are going to do something regardless, and then they tend to like put the blame game on movies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I find that the news is more horrifying than than any horror movie
Yeah,
that's out there
it
right now.
is.
You
It
know,
really
so
is.
if you want to blame horror movies, I mean, obviously there's just so many horrible events happening. You know that I feel like that's more has more of an effect on people.
Yes,
You know, with my
absolutely.
kids, for instance, it's important for me to show them, you know, what I'm doing is fake. It's and so they've gotten used to it. They've been around it so long
Mm-hmm.
that they kind of see behind the curtain and realize that this is not real. Um, and I, as a kid, you know, obviously I was a kid in the 80s. And so um, there were a lot of, at that point, a lot of horror movies that people were saying, you know, don't watch. It was like Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger, all
Yeah,
that stuff. Well, that unfortunately just made me want to watch them even more. So
exactly.
I
Yes.
would find ways to do that. And so, like, by the 90s, I was like this expert in the horror genre. And it's funny because, like, my favorite subgenre of horror is slasher.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, the Friday the 13th franchise is my favorite horror franchise. And I have like 4
Mine
Crystal
too.
Lake T-shirts that I
Mine
wear
too.
around and all that
It's the
stuff.
best.
But that's a genre where I'm like, I've always wanted to make a slasher movie, but I can't have yet to come up with a concept where I'm like, that's it. That's a completely new way to go about
Yeah,
it.
it's hard. It's
It's
hard,
very, very
especially
hard.
even in the creature subgenre. That's why I really love your work because you keep it original
Yeah.
and fresh and I love that you said cathartic because I've spoken with a lot of friends and filmmakers and um, fans of horror films, and they relate to it being therapeutical. Growing up, they have a hard time. It would be
Right.
depression, it would be bullying, it would be
Right.
thoughts of suicide, and they say that horror films have literally saved their lives. I've had fans tell me that Friday the 13th franchise specifically, watching Jason battle off his demons
Yeah.
has saved them and I love that you said that it was cathartic for you because I do believe that a lot of hardcore fans
Well,
really
it's a release watching a horror movie, and I mean,
yeah
and in some ways, like you know, for instance, the recent movie, The Black Phone, that was the most tense
oh
I've been in a movie,
yes
watching a movie in
yes
years, and afterwards I just felt excellent, you know, just. But it's
yes
funny because it's like I know people who are like I can just relax, watch a horror movie, and just go drift off to sleep every night, and I'm kind of like
I
that,
can
you know.
too
I
I
find it
I'll
they're very
I'll put
relaxing
evil
to me.
yeah I'll put on Evil Dead just for familiar
Right.
background noise because there's a comfort in the familiarity of I guess
Exactly.
people being possessed by a cat or demon and just
Yeah. Yeah.
numbering the friends.
Exactly. If anyone finds me watching romantic comedies by myself, that means that's a sign something's wrong. So, but I've always been that way. Like I've watched horror movies for decades now, and yeah, there's
Yes.
some. Whenever there's a new one in theaters, I'll go see it no matter what, no matter if it's got bad reviews or what. I'll go see it.
Yeah.
Um, so for me,
Black
that's like why
Phone.
I've always liked the genre.
Yeah, I have to, and I have to agree with you. Black Phone was one of the best, not one of the best films that I've seen, but one of the best recent films that I've seen.
Recent horror
Character
movie,
of
it
the
was really
character
good.
of Gwendolyn, the young sister in that,
Yeah.
she's just what a breath of fresh air, man. She
Yeah,
is such a
yeah.
great character.
The whole concept was really a breath of fresh air.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, it really was, and it was creepy, and it was very well woven together, especially with the supernatural. Um, Speaking of the supernatural, um, tell us about a terrifying true life experience that you've had with the supernatural or paranormal.
Well, that's a tricky one. I tend to take a lot of ghost tours. There's Atchison, Kansas is not far from us, and so we've taken ghost tours there. And there was a house, and I cannot remember if it was. I can't remember the name if it was called the Sally House, but you can go in and you can tour it. And it was just really, I got a vibe. And I don't know, like, I'm not gonna say I can feel like energy and stuff because I don't know if that's true or not, but there was a very heavy feeling in the air in that house on the tour, and I kept saying that I could smell sulfur. Nobody else could smell it, right? So they brought in this supposed person with some intuition into the house, and they're like, the ghost specifically doesn't like you, and that's why you're smelling the sulfur. And I'm like, that's strange. I'm like, because my wife was with me and she couldn't smell it, and I was just getting a really bad vibe in there. And I'm used to going on these fun tours. I've toured the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, and this was way creepier. And there was something very strange about it. I ended up just going outside and just relax. I gotta get out of this house. I just got really claustrophobic and felt weird about it. And while I was out in the front lawn, I kept getting dive bombed by like tons of bees and stuff. So I'm like, okay, this whole area just doesn't like me for some reason.
Right.
So I would say that's probably one of the weirder experiences I've had that I would deem suspiciously paranormal, I guess.
It kind of reminds me of Rod Steiger and the Amityville Horror movie.
That was exactly with the flies. Yeah.
That would be creepy.
That's in Atchison, Kansas.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that's in Atchison, Kansas. So they have like tours, and I'm not sure they still tour that house, but I do know that they do ghost tours because it's supposedly one of the most haunted towns in America. They've done like a bunch of like those ghost hunting shows have done a bunch of episodes in that town. So
yeah. Do you have any stories about the hotel? Now that was the hotel that inspired The Shining, wasn't it? The Stanley Hotel that you had mentioned, the Overlook.
It was I had a couple films playing at the Estes Park Film Festival, so we were out there, and I was like, well, let's take this tour of the Stanley Hotel because I'd seen it, heard a lot about it. I think they used it, funny enough, I think they used it for a couple scenes in Dumb and Dumber. But the actual Stanley Hotel was not used for the original Shining. It was used for the TV miniseries. So they were doing all these quizzes. They're like, how much of the original Shining movie was shot here? And I was like, raised my hand. And I was like, 0. And they're like, you were right. So, but it was okay. It was probably not one of my favorite tours that I've taken that that we'd call a ghost tour. It felt kind of, I don't know, it felt touristy, I guess.
Touristy. It was just like a money grab kind of.
Yeah. But I mean, the hotel itself is beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful.
Oh yeah. I would love to visit it. I've seen pictures of it. That's definitely one location I would love to visit, and maybe even go to New York and see the original Amityville house. Would be.
Oh, I would love that. I would love to go to the original place they shot the first Friday the 13th, because they do like. Oh yeah. They do like campouts there and stuff, but.
Yeah, they do. I know Adrian King attends those a lot, and recently more cast members from the franchise have been getting involved.
That's cool.
So that would be really fun. Thank you, Patrick Rea, for joining us. I would like to thank all of our viewers here and all of our listeners that are tuned in to listen to this episode of the Terror Express, and we look forward to putting out more content for them. And Patrick Rea, again, I thank you so much for being here on this episode.
Thank you very much.
And I look forward to seeing your future projects, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably gonna go watch Nailbiter again soon, and I also want to throw out there your artwork for They Wait in the Dark is phenomenal. Whoever did that, I just want to throw props out to that.
He's excellent. His name, I can't remember his name is Spencer, and he did the poster for I Am Lisa, the original artwork for that one, and then he did this one too, and
brilliant.
He did a fantastic job. So I'm gonna keep hiring him. So
yeah, he's great. That's great work. So. But it was great having you on, and great talking with you. And I thank you so much for your time.
All right.
Thank you so much.